And I'm the president and CEO of the State Chamber of Commerce. And I want to welcome you to a very interesting and timely topic that we have on our webinar today, which is the state of the cannabis industry in New Jersey. We're kind of at an interesting place regarding that industry today. We have a situation where the use of cannabis is legal in New Jersey, but the regulatory mechanism is not in place. So there's no place to buy it. It's kind of an interesting spot to be in. But here today to talk about it is a very distinguished panel of legislators. We have Assemblywoman Ora Dunn, Senator Troy Singleton, Assemblyman Benji Wimberly, and Assemblyman Andrew Zwicker. And today's webinar will be moderated by Bill Caruso, who co-chairs the Archer Cannabis Practice, is a member of our state board of directors, and a leading expert on this topic in New Jersey. So without any further ado, Bill Caruso, it's all yours.
Hey, Tom, thank you. And to my friends here at the Chamber and to our audience, I really want to thank Tom publicly. This is a tough issue. This has been a journey for a lot of folks. And we started in earnest on the advocacy side over 5 years ago here in New Jersey. And as a new member of this board, Tom, in a very difficult place, you've always been open-minded and welcoming on this. And I think have struck the perfect balance. This is a new industry, as you said. It's going to fit in tandem with our current industry. And that's the goal, to have it blend, to change this culture. There's lots of benefits that are going to come. We're going to talk about some of that today. There's challenges for employers, current employers too. But I really thank you for your leadership. It's not just on this. It's been throughout this pandemic. I joke with Michael Egginton all the time that this organization is all about saving business and creating business. And I really appreciate your open-mindedness and your help and advocacy in making this law better. So it's been a privilege.
Thanks.
To our audience, you have an esteemed panel of legislators here, each of whom have distinguished themselves in their own right in this place, in this issue. So what I'm asking each of them to do first, and we're going to start with Assemblywoman Dunn, is just a quick introduction so the audience knows who you are. But moreover, what is your access to this issue? What are your concerns? What are your what draws you to this issue, and where do you think we can go? And then we're going to get into some more specific questions. So without further ado, Assemblywoman Dunn. Assemblywoman, excuse me, you got it on mute.
Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of this distinguished panel and very important discussion. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Assemblywoman Ora Dunn. I represent District 25, which covers 20 towns in Morris County and one town in Somerset, Bernardsville. I am just completing my first year in the legislature. Prior to that, I had 25 years in education policy and advocacy. I represented organizations like Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. My main driver to serve in office is to enhance the future for our children. So it should come to no surprise to you what has been my chief concern for this policy debate is the impact of public health and safety, and particularly regarding adolescent development. And as we know, young adults, the brain is continuing to develop until age 25. So that, throughout has been my main focus, very much attuned to what New Jersey psychologists and psychiatrists and other mental health providers have put forth on that. So again, and we know it's central to this current debate about removing parents in the, in this process, which of course is an enhancement to a child's mental health and well-being. So without further ado, we'll pass it on to my other panelists and really welcome the Q&A.
Great. Senator Singleton, if you would be so kind to introduce yourself and maybe a little bit on your nexus to this issue.
Good morning, Bill, and thank you. And thank you to the Chamber of Commerce for having me this morning and allowing this robust discussion. My name is Senator Troy Singleton. I represent the 7th Legislative District, which comprises of 17 towns in the western part of Burlington County. And the cannabis issue to me has always been about social equity and trying to address some of the ills of what I believe was a ill-advised, ill-informed drug policy that our nation, frankly, has had that's devastated communities. And I think we now saw the evolution of this issue from when I was a child to where I am now as a legislator in so many minds across both sides of the aisle, frankly, shows the evolution of thought on this really particular and complex issue. New Jersey right now is on the precipice of setting a regulatory framework that will allow our recreational industry to move forward. And for me, one of the things I want to make sure is that industry is inclusive of all New Jerseyans, inclusive of women entrepreneurs and minority entrepreneurs who, frankly, the statistics tell us across the nation are not engaged and reaping the benefits of the growth in the cannabis industry. So that has been my focus as a policymaker, amongst a few other different avenues within this space. But that has been a particular emphasis of mine, to making sure that we have an inclusive cannabis industry that allows all New Jerseyans to reap its benefits. So I look forward to the Q&A, and I'm thrilled to be on this panel this morning. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Assemblywoman Wimberly, if you could give us a quick introduction and explain some of your interest in this issue.
Good morning. I want to thank the Chamber for having me this morning. Bill, always a pleasure, to be in your presence, and the distinguished panel and other guests. Along the same lines of Troy, I mean, my biggest has been the social injustice when it comes to the disparity of arrest and impact that marijuana and drugs has had on communities. Living in Patterson, where I represent the 35th district, it has been devastating. Small amounts of marijuana has ruined people's opportunities when it comes to education, housing, job opportunities. And this is something that I hope we will be able to mend. And obviously looking for economic justice when it comes to minorities and women to have an opportunity to benefit from this in our communities as far as economic growth, to obviously look at, increasing property value and economic justice within our community. But my main focus will be and continue to be to make sure that, the disparity issue when it comes to arrest and the impact that it has on, so many communities of color will be addressed throughout this and on both ends. So thank you for having me this morning.
Excellent. Just one quick reminder before we go to Assemblywoman Zwicker. If you have questions, you can direct your questions to the questions person in the chat. So we will be getting to some Q&A towards the end of this, but if you have questions, there's a questions person in the chat. You can direct your questions there. And last but not least, Assemblyman Zwicker, if you could give us a quick introduction and your nexus to this issue.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Tom and Mike. Thanks to everybody who's here today. I really appreciate a chance to be on this panel and just talk about these issues. For me, Bill, it starts with a couple places. I have a background in science. And so the first question that came to my mind was around medical marijuana a couple of years ago, and was part of a team working on what is the positive impact when it comes to cannabis? How can we put forth legislation and regulations, because cannabis has been shown scientifically to have such a positive impact on people with a variety of different afflictions. So that's how I first got into this. But to what Senator Singleton and Assemblyman Wimberly talked about, I spent the past year talking and meeting, and most importantly, listening to a variety of different people about social equity, about the just unbelievably negative impact on people across the board, economically, racially, socially. So those are sort of the two pieces of how can I be a part of both medical, how can I be a part of the social justice part. Then finally, looking at things that I think we'll get into more when it comes to protecting employees and making sure that employers have clear regulatory framework. So that's where I've come at it. And for those who don't know me, I should have said this. I represent the 16th district, which is 14 towns in the central part of New Jersey, parts of 4 counties.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Thank you to each of our panelists. Maybe we're going to start by going back on the round robin, back to Assemblywoman Dunn. And Assemblywoman, I had a chance, we talked a little bit about this, but there's a misconception out there that this is somehow a partisan issue. I think one of the beauties of this issue we saw in the polling in November is there's bipartisan support large and wide for a variety of reasons: economic development, this idea that we've talked about here related to social equity, that we should not be really ending people's financial lives, right? If we want people to get above and get off of whether it's public assistance or be able to rise up and contribute to the economy, this life sentence that sometimes comes along with the marijuana conviction prevents them from doing that by getting an education or even being gainfully employed. But these are bipartisan issues. These are not Democrats. So talk to me as a Republican, where you see the ability for people like yourself and other legislators to work together, because I think there is so much benefit that comes from having a bipartisan effort of these. Where do you think there's some places here where Republicans would lend benefit to this discussion and help to move these ideas forward?
Thank you. Well, I want to suggest that Republicans have value to add to every aspect, every part of the discussion, and not to be marginalized or really not listened to. And we saw that. We saw that a couple weeks ago on the floor of the Assembly when this bill was passed. Republicans stood up and highlighted the controversy, the sticking points. Really the infringement of parents' rights, not to mention, really handcuffing law enforcement in their ability to enhance public safety. So the discussion was there, out in the open, but I don't feel we were heard. And it's interesting because I know Assemblyman Conaway just this morning was quoted for saying that we're going to clean this up. We're going to fix this to better align with the sensibilities of the people. Well, this is a great lesson to learn that regardless of party, we are talking to the people. We are talking to our constituents. We are hearing what matters to them. And it's not just bipartisan. I would say we reached near consensus on having legalized adult recreational marijuana. And beyond that, decriminalizing possession and use of marijuana, which I supported. So, I think that the realization that we've got to listen to one another and recognize that while we may disagree on some things, we are all listening to the people and working with the people. And this goes on. This should be extended to just policy making in general. There needs to be more coming together and compromise.
Just one quick thing on that issue, and given your background on the education advocacy side and your connection to youth, the fix is on its way. And you're right, there is consensus on this. And listen, this is part of the legislative process. It's a good thing to get there. The challenge, obviously, especially dealing with youth, is deterrent impact, but making sure we're not infringing on rights and potentially putting kids in more harm's way. Dr. David Nathan from Doctors for Cannabis Regulation, one of the experts, you mentioned psychologists and others that have said, we want to keep kids away from drugs, under 25, developing brains and all that, but interactions with police and things of that nature are equally as dangerous. So do you have an idea or suggestion in terms of how to blend that, how to be able to make sure that we're involving parents, deterring children from getting access to marijuana, but at the same time respecting the fact that we want to limit police interactions as much as possible? That's, I think, one of the other things that came out in this vote in November.
Absolutely. And again, I'm not the expert, but I am conveying the messages that I'm hearing from the experts in the mental health community, in the substance use community, right, addictions community. So, for one of the main issues I had was the low level of funding that's designated to underage prevention, efforts. I believe it's only at 15% of the revenue. So that's certainly something that should be enhanced, because again, we all agree, right? We want to limit minors' consumption. We're in the midst of an opioid addictions epidemic. We need to be talking about this. We need to be destigmatizing it. And of course, when it comes to strengthening relationships, the community relations with law enforcement, who, they're already there, they're on the ground. I spoke to a chief of police, and it just resonated with me. He said, every parent wants the best for their child. We're all unified on that. And there's never a time where, that we're not thinking of that and really wanting to limit the punitive aspect. And of course, in hindering a child's future for occupational success, academic success with the criminalization of use. So that's been already underway. And I agree, I grew up in a working class in Brooklyn, and I saw it. I saw the kid whose dad was an electrician versus the dad that was a lawyer, and who got stuck in the penal system. So we definitely, that's definitely, I hope that the Regulatory Commission continues to work on as well. But I hope that answered some of your questions.
It was outstanding. Thank you very much. We'll be back. We have more questions. I'm going to do some of your other panels, but thank you very much. Senator Singleton, you have distinguished yourself on a variety of efforts related to helping businesses in our state, but also doing it in a fair and equitable way. I was really pleased to see your efforts involved in this issue. I think you've been dutiful in terms of your attention. I don't think you were an early adopter. I think you came to this thing looking at exactly what you said, trying to figure out how we make it fair, how we make it right. I really want to dive into, we talk about this here at the Chamber a lot. The small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. You seem laser focused in making sure that our industry looks like the people that live here. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe some of the ideas that you have and where you're going?
Certainly, Bill. But if I could, I just want to put in broader context the discussion today, and I'll get into that. I think we are spending thus far, we spent a lot of time on one of the legislative pieces that we've been wrapped around legalization. And I think that it's important to have that discussion. And it's also important to know that that issue is being addressed and corrected. And hopefully we'll have bipartisan support to do that. And the decriminalization, which had bipartisan support to do that, which was also critically important. But I also think the underlying bill that actually paved the way for recreational use in our state, which over at one poll had over 65% of New Jerseyans supporting support in all political parties, Democrats, Republicans, independents. That proposal in and of itself did not see bipartisan support. It didn't see bipartisan support in the Assembly. It didn't see it in the Senate, and in the Assembly, definitely, and in the Senate. And I think part of that is we need to be honest with each other, right? Yes, there are aspects of that bill that were problematic and are being addressed. And through the leadership of a lot of people, it's getting done. And I'm proud to see it. But let's not lose sight that the setting up the foundation of the recreational cannabis industry in our state was not embraced by every member of the legislature. And it did break down on partisan lines. And that is really, really unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we couldn't have seen more support and consensus from all, considering the people elected us to listen to the people, and 65% plus going into that said, this is what I want to see happen. But going back to your question, and I apologize for taking a tangent, but going back to your question, I think the focus of looking at this issue, we've seen in other states where especially recreational has happened, and even medical has happened, quite frankly. We see the industry does not look like a microcosm of those states. And for me, that is where I get to with trying to craft some of the public policy that we've done. One proposal has already made it through the Senate, is making its way through the Assembly, which would allow there to be greater capital infusion to help women and minority entrepreneurs to actually have the same stake in this industry that some of the more corporatization of the cannabis industry has had. We know, like if you were thinking through licensing is one tool that could help, but there's also a critical need for the infusion of capital. No one can run to a bank as we sit here today and get a loan out to do this. And if you're a young minority or young woman entrepreneur or of any age of minority or women entrepreneur, the statistics are glaring. You are just not an owner in this space. And that is what we need to change. And since we have the opportunity to create this industry, and I hearken back and have spoken to some of my colleagues who go way back to when we built the casino industry in our state, this was a similar conversation. There were fits and starts about how you get it started. And there was a lot of tinkering along the way. But once we got it going, we see where the casino industry is going to take with the expansion of online gaming, et cetera. So for us in this piece, it is critically important that we do not lose sight that in its beginning, that we make sure that everyone has an opportunity to have a stake in its growth. And that has been the legislative focus that I'm proudly have been trying to lead and working with so many colleagues to really get that done. And I think that's the direction we should be moving.
I think that's excellent. And I agree with your first comment too. Just one thing I'll give a shout out to this chamber and our leader, Bracken. Throughout the pandemic, there's been a lot of discussions about access to capital and other issues and how the PPP was divvied out. Under Tom's leadership, convened really towards the end of last year, this body, this chamber, has created a important committee now related to diversity and inclusion throughout our business community. This effort's going to be chaired, or has been chaired now, by friends of yours, Marjorie Perry and Bill Hageman. And you will expect from us cooperation and help, because I think the expertise of this business community can help with a lot of these young and new, not so young too, entrepreneurs that are coming into this space. So on behalf of us, if I may, count us as allies here. Count us as help where you need it. This is what this industry should look like. It should have opportunity here to create new wealth, new taxpayers, and new revenue for both communities, and we're going to get to that in a second, but also for this state. And Assemblywoman Dunn mentioned about education. We have seen significant income flow into these states. I think the other side where you've been active is making sure that money flows to the right places too. There's new revenue coming into the state. Let's make sure it's going to the right places too. Let's just not have it go into the bottomless pit of Trenton in the dark hole of the budget. And I know your advocacy there has been focused on that as well.
Yeah, I think, look, if we've spent a great deal of time talking about that this is not about money, that this is about making real social change in communities that have been devastated by the war on drugs. I felt, and I know, many felt that if we're going to say that, then we need to make our deeds match our words. And that was the structure of the enabling legislation. It was very intentional because you have to be intentional if you want to make the kind of change in the communities we're talking about. Has very specific guardrails what money can be used for. But the CRC, the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, will still have to present something back to the legislature. And the legislature, like we do with spending, will have to vote up or down whether those initiatives match what the legislative intent was. And I expect a robust debate from all of my colleagues, not just those who represent communities that have been impacted, but all of us who care about the 9 million New Jerseyans, because it benefits us all if all of our communities are stronger and better. So I look forward to that. I was one of the folks who, with so many others, who worked to make sure that language was included because we want to make sure that we have to be intentional if we want to make structural change. And it is about social equity. It is about changing the dynamic as we see it today. And it's not about chasing a dollar to do that. It's about really making systemic change in our state.
Thank you, Senator. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Assemblywoman Wimberly, you have been an early adopter. You've been somebody that actually leaned in very early in this process. You've traveled to learn and experience the industry and how it's grown up in other jurisdictions. And you've seen the benefit now in your home district in the city of Paterson, where there is a licensed operator there who's paying local taxes. Can you talk to us a little bit? I mean, Troy talked a little bit about where we're headed into the development of a diverse industry, but what's the impact on a community like Paterson, and what do you see as a vision moving forward, not Paterson, but throughout our smaller communities and larger communities in New Jersey?
I mean, Senator Singleton hit so many valid points already, even along this line, and Paterson in particular. The economic benefit is that we have a very small tax base. We have 2/3 of our properties are not taxed due to being public schools, churches, or county buildings, being the county seat. So you're talking about you have only 1/3 of your residents paying the bulk of the property taxes. And we had an 8-year period where we had a 54% property tax increase. So we're playing catch up when it comes to the benefits of the economics of the cannabis industry in Paterson. I believe they made their first payment recently, and that was a major plus, and actually paid more than that was anticipated What I would like to see, though, is that, the benefit is that, I would like to see more minorities involved in the next setup that's going to be done in Patterson. I think the initial one should have been, but it wasn't, and that to me was a little disturbing, because you're talking about the third largest city with a diverse population of 57 different nationalities. And, it should have been a minority owner to be the first here in the city of Patterson. So as we move forward, I will push our administration to make sure that the next person in line, and there are minority groups that are set up, that have, reached out, and we want to make sure that they have a fair chance. And that, the roadblocks in front of them, be it the economic setup or just the red tape, I want to be there to make sure that they have those opportunities in our town and towns that look like me, our town.
I'm going to jump ahead because this came up in the questions, but I think it's relevant, particularly in a city like Patterson, but there's other places where access to land becomes an issue, both from access to capital issues, but literally the ability to find a place that qualifies. You mentioned schools. Proximity to schools is still, because of federal law, an issue. What challenges do you see in a city like Patterson then to kind of allow for the development, the ability for lower financial means folks that can get into this game because of the high cost of real estate, but being able to identify these parcels and then acquire them for the applications? Do you see that as a challenge for Patterson? Do you see that challenge for other cities around the state?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a valid situation. I mean, we're 8.4 square miles, but we have 150,000 people, and we have 52 educational properties in this town. So it's almost, you really have to, work to get it done. And the density issue is going to be the same thing when you look at cities like Union City and Hoboken and things of that nature, because we are just literally living on top of each other. I mean, I think we're the third densely populated city in the United States. That's how, tight our quarters are. So that's going to be a major challenge for us to make sure that, these properties are available. The unfortunate thing is, due to COVID, we've had so many shut down businesses that the properties are starting to open back up, and you'll see, for rent, for sale signs in many of the locations that I think will, be accepted as far as all of the guidelines, the federal guidelines.
Yeah, and actually, and I'll just take a minute there if you don't mind. You all in the legislature, in your wisdom, which I think was very smart, gave municipalities a choice to come back now and decide what they want to do. They have time now to adopt new ordinances. As they're doing that, I think you mentioned this COVID phenomenon. We are seeing a lot of folks take a look at the 2% revenue that was allocated in the constitutional amendment, coupled with the fact that, retail operations on Main Street have literally disappeared, whether it's been restaurants or storefronts. And looking at cannabis, similar to what we saw with the craft brewery industry that started a couple of years ago, again, through legislative work, there is an ability to potentially have these be as anchors in the right areas in downtowns to help drive traffic. And COVID might actually be an incentive now in a weird sort of way to help allocate these retail locations, which are the hardest to cite. So we'll see where that happens. But I think whether it's Patterson or Ridgewood, in our area, it would be somewhere in Woodbury or Haddonfield. There's a benefit across the board here, and we're seeing each of these municipalities start to figure out what they want, where they want it, and how they want to then allocate this revenue back down. Again, not life-changing money, as you said. I think they doubled. I think they were expecting $10,000 a month, and I think they got $25,000 in Patterson. God bless, right? But that's interesting money, but it's not. You're not building a school with that yet, So, but it's exciting. So thanks, Assemblyman. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill.
Last but not least, Assemblyman Zwicker, you have dove into a very interesting topic: the interaction between this new industry and new rights for both employees and recreational consumers, medical patients, and those that are traditional employers that previously may have tested for drugs for a variety of reasons. And for mostly federal law, compliance with federal law, continue to have some jeopardy. what are your thoughts on where we're going? I know we passed some legislation now that's changed some of the law, and I think you're working on some things now. What are your thoughts on that nexus?
Sure, Bill. Before I answer that, I just want to come back to something that both Assemblyman Wimberly and Senator Singleton talked about. When we talk about equity of this burgeoning industry, we often look to other states who have legalized marijuana well before we did to see what happened with intent and what happened in practice. So there was a survey in Colorado just last year looking at the breakdown of who has licenses in Colorado, and there's several thousand. And just to give you a sense of how important this is, so the population of Colorado is about 30% Latino. Only about 13% of the licenses are with Latino-owned business owners. Colorado's population is 10% Black. It's only about 5% of the licenses are held by Black business owners. So intent is critical, but it's so super important that as New Jersey rolls this out, that we really do make sure that legislatively and regulatorily that we are providing equal access. Senator Singleton talked about the importance of money and capital, for instance. So this is going to be really key over this next year. Going to California to answer your question. So just last week, I know of a young woman who finished school, time for her first job, and was all set to go. It is literally the day of her orientation, and she's told that she's lost her employment. She's failed a cannabis drug test. This was for an office job. So not a position that is of risk to people, at risk to other employees. And this has to do with what is really the difference. Because sometimes I think about this. Well, alcohol's been legal since Prohibition ended in the 20s. There's really no difference in cannabis, but there is, and I think that's what you're alluding to. And that's the fact that we have well-established standardized tests to know who is under the influence and know in the immediate when it comes to alcohol. We don't know that when it comes to cannabis. And cannabis can stay in your system for days and perhaps weeks. And so in this particular case, this was someone who had legally imbibed cannabis, but was in no way under the influence when it was time to go to her job. That's really an issue. On the same side is the employer side of having to follow federal rules, having to follow state rules, having to follow a variety of workplace safety rules. So this gets to some of the things Assemblywoman Dunn talked about, needing to clean up, if you will, and or really listen to employers, listen to employees when it comes to what are some of these issues. So Senator Paul Sarlo, the chair of the Budget Committee, introduced about a week or so ago a piece of legislation trying to get at worker protection and workplace protection when it comes in particular to high-risk industries. And I'm introducing the similar legislation in the Assembly. But this is another piece of what really has to happen, because employers are in difficult situations, as you said, Bill, because of federal rules, guidelines, and now state rules. And so how to make sure that we marry this while protecting people who will have the legal right to consume cannabis is another key issue as we move forward.
And one of our challenges, unfortunately, is you, as one branch of government at the state level, you are challenged by the lack of law, at least in this place, or illegality at the federal level. But on the same token, you have the courts making law in their own right here pertaining to medical rights, and it's sort of a culmination of laws coming together and trying to be in a real-time effort dealing with this. I agree with the concept of working with employers and figuring out what works. I think one of the things that's happened thus far is there were some concepts put together in terms of, as you said, with a lack of technology and the differences of law to figure out where we land. I think the ability to come back once through a regulatory process or even before it, figure out what we still need to do. In addition, allowing new technologies to develop as well. In this world right now, and one of my favorite answers is I don't know. So don't be bashful. But two questions for you, and maybe the answer here is you're working on this. Will there be in New Jersey companies that still can deny employment on pre-test efforts? So I've used cannabis and I can't be employed. And then where do you see the law, at least from the state statutory side, coming in terms of bright lines for employers? If you were king of the world, I know you're not, but what do you think would be the right answers there?
That to me, Bill?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Oh, yeah. So I'm not king of the world. I'm just one of 9 million people trying to do the right thing here. I think there's a couple of different things. And so the proposal that Senator Sarlo put forth is very specific. It does a couple of things. It identifies some industries where the answer is yes, right? This is those that are very safety conscious. So you can think about construction jobs, you can think about railway jobs, various law enforcement jobs, where because we don't have the technology to know who is under the influence, we really feel like the choice now is to just say pre-employment testing is allowed and no consumption of any kind. There's just too much of a potential risk to others. But within that is to get at what you're saying, is that allow any employer to put in an application to the commission to be considered, because not all different, we can't come up with what all the various types of sectors might be. And so someone who may have a business they feel is very high risk will have an opportunity to apply to the commission for consideration. That's the way to try to balance this. It's basically saying one size doesn't fit all.
Excellent. Assemblywoman Dunn, I was going to actually come back to you. This is great.
Okay. Well, if I could just add to that, I know we talked a lot about density, and of course, as one of the most populous states, that is something we are mindful every day, and we are faced with a housing crisis, right? And I was just talking to a mom, a single mother of 4 children. Her youngest is 2 years old and has asthma. She lives in transitional housing. And she said, the rules are so tight, I can't even bring in a bottle of wine. And believe me, raising 4 children and working full time, that wine might be welcome at the end of the long day. But yet her neighbor, in this dense, multi-family apartment unit, smokes marijuana constantly. And she's like, what are my rights in terms of how I protect my child of that exposure? I mean, she described all the measures she took in to try to limit the fumes from entering her apartment. So I just bring that up that obviously, right, besides the workplace and beyond, we're really going to have to figure out how to balance really people's personal rights and, of course, the health aspect here to it.
There are, and if I could jump in on that one, because I know that's an ongoing issue, there are challenges that will develop. My guess, by the way, without knowing all the facts there, that the person that's utilizing marijuana by smoking it is probably doing so as a medical patient, and the rights are a little bit more stringent there than a recreational patient. But in housing situations, landlords do have the right to restrict smoking, do have the right to restrict public use in public areas. And, I'd also offer this in terms of where we are with the law. And I guess it's culture, it's change, it's understanding the law, right? There's a need. Some of that is exactly how our municipalities are going to deal with this. I'm an advocate. I don't think we should have people walking down the street with bongs. I think that we don't have that with alcohol right now, unless it's allowed. And if a town says this is the designated area where we want to have people consuming alcohol publicly, whether it's a beachfront or a park or outside our area, the town can do that. But the town also has the right to restrict public use of alcohol, and will have the right to restrict public use of cannabis, smoking in public. And I think you're going to see laws that adopt that way. Homeowners associations are going to be dealing with that. It does get to be a challenge in certain areas, though, in these sort of unrestricted or one-off sort of housing situations where, it's one landlord and not understanding the rights. But it's a process, and we're going to work through. And my guess is, with a balance, and it's good to have a panel of bipartisan legislators here with a balance. approaching problems as they come, as they develop down the line, and figuring out how best to fix them. But right now, for that individual person, particularly if it's a medical patient who's her neighbor, she doesn't have a lot of options, and it is a challenge raising in the situation she is. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to, and it will fall on the municipalities who are obligated to set up these ordinances when we're still, the executive and the legislative branches are still fighting over, what needs to be corrected. So we were kind of hamstringing municipalities on that, but hopefully they will get more, they'll get some more time as we work this out, and the fight keeps evolving, right? Now it's how much money and who gets it, and should parents be involved? So I know you had other questions for the panel. So
we do, and these are good points. And I'm going to say this to you: this is an advertisement for the lawyers and the lobbyists of the world. They don't normally get that, but the good news right now is the big moneyed lawyers and lobbyists for the banking industry, the insurance industry, the real estate industry, who had nothing to do with cannabis previously, are lobbying Congress now to fix some of this broken law. And we've talked a lot of issues today about employment, about access to capital. I'm going to get to one that I'm going to talk to Troy about in a second, related to insurance, because he's been working on some areas there that I think I benefit. The absence and the difficulty of federal law is going to change to some extent because of this activity going on, and it's going to free up your hands as a state legislative body to do some more work in this space. And again, I think on a bipartisan level, I think there's broad agreement. Senator Singleton, you and I have talked. I know you've advocated for, I think in the employer-employer setting, you've seen so much benefit of what can come here. But I really wanted to talk a little bit about the insurance side. We have a medical market here still. There's tremendous benefit we're starting to see of patients availing themselves of this in a medical way, but cost is still prohibitive. We are starting to see a change. I mentioned the federal level. Believe it or not, the workers' comp industry has come alive and figured out that treatment with cannabis for pain management rather than opioids gets people back to work quicker and with less side effects and a lot less expensive. What do you think? I mean, what roles, given the issues at the federal level, what roles do you think you could play at a state level? What do you think the state could be doing more for helping to subsidize medical cannabis, if you agree with that?
Well, I think, medical cannabis, starting from the premise that it's medicine, right? And like the same fight that many of us have led on the idea of trying to control the escalating costs of prescription drugs, we need to have that same intensity and same focus as it relates to medical cannabis. One of the proposals that we're working on that we're still refining and will continue to refine is this idea of a supplemental program for individuals who are qualified for our Medicaid and family care and also our medical cannabis patients. And we would look to subsidize the medical cannabis pricing by 20%, basically, of that group. We can identify that group. It's a finite number of folks, at least initially to start out. And then the secondary component of that, which I think is so important, is we don't want to subsidize high prices. And this has been something, frankly, that the advocate community has educated me on because they live it every day as they go to ATCs, right? They live it every day. So our focus in this legislation and what it will hopefully evolve to is trying to look at sort of what the price structure is around us, right? Because if you look at Washington, D.C., and I was struck by a friend of mine who said, when I buy an ounce in Washington, D.C., I pay a decent amount, but I'm okay. But I give my arm and a leg when I buy that same ounce in New Jersey. And it's not fair and it's not right. So we need to actually have the same conversation about cost controls that we've had in the prescription drug space, which has garnered bipartisan support. It's my hope that we can have that same conversation and come to that same conclusion here in New Jersey when it comes to medical cannabis. We don't want to price people out of getting their medicine. We see it now on the prescription drug side. Folks are cutting their medicine in half just to try and they have it extend longer. It's a similar approach that we need to make sure that we do on the cannabis side. We don't want to have anyone go into the poorhouse because they're sick and need their medicine. So we need to be smart about that. And as of now, because there isn't an ability for an insurance company many to develop insurance programs to do that. We need to, again, match our deeds with our words about making sure that we provide a more affordable opportunity for folks to be able to live and get the medicine they need. And then, Bill, if I may, just to circle back, because the Assemblywoman Dunn raised an excellent point, and it is a part of the ongoing conversation about how the implementation of this law will be crafted. But I don't want anyone to walk away with this idea that if you live in a private multifamily housing complex, the owners of that facility can say there'll be no cannabis smoked in our building. That's what the law says right now. Like, that's what the law that was passed that many of us supported says. Like, you can't do it. And frankly, based on the Indoor Clean Air Act, if you can't smoke a cigarette there, you can't smoke cannabis there. So that limits that as well. And it's thoughtful that it's limited. Similar for condo associations. Their board has to decide whether they want to allow it in areas like that. So all of that is already in the law that was passed, but the implementation of that, the Assemblywoman is correct. The CRC, the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, is going to have to put the right framework around to allow that to happen. But I don't want anyone to walk away from the conversation to think that if they live in a private multifamily dwelling and someone next door who is a non-medical patient is smoking, that they will now have carte blanche to smoke wherever they want. That is just not how the law is written, and it's not what it'll allow it to do. So, but the idea of making sure that we can find a way to subsidize those who need it the most from the medical side, that is the legislative initiatives we're doing, but that only works if we're not subsidizing high prices. So we need to find a way to put some cost containment control down, which is why some of my friends in the medical industry, medical cannabis industry don't like this, why we need to really embrace this concept of home grow and do it in a thoughtful and reasonable way, because the pricing that we are seeing here in New Jersey is really putting people outside of their market. So I'm going to try and engage conversation on both of those points with my colleagues, and we'll see where it takes us.
It's welcome, it's needed, and I'll say this to you. On the issue of home grow, somebody that works with this industry and works with advocates, any serious person in the industry that is opposed to a limited patient home grow isn't really serious. Most of the
I would agree.
Realize that's not their competition. They're not playing for that. And it is absolutely humane and right. Good for you. Good for you. Yep. I'm going to try to get to two more quick questions, one for Assemblyman Wimberly and one for Assemblyman Zwicker. Assemblyman Wimberly, you and I have talked about this, no problem that you're trying to help your constituents solve, or every problem you're trying to help is easier to solve when they have a job, when they're working, when they're employed, hopefully with benefits, right? You mentioned the ownership disparity, right? We want to see different ownership structure here for the people that possess these licenses, but there's an entire ancillary market. There are so many opportunities that I think are a nexus to this industry. And so what I wanted to sort of dive into here is, for the audience sitting out there, you don't necessarily have to be a license holder to be benefiting from this industry. And maybe talk a little bit about Patterson. I mean, you have business owners that are there right now, packaging companies, potentially folks that are in the delivery service and other places. Maybe talk a little bit, and specifically somewhat from what you've seen in your research in other areas. What can municipalities learn? What can other folks that are looking out there to be involved in this industry, what can they be looking at here to kind of be on the, what we'll call it, nexus to this industry rather than directly in this industry?
Bill, I think we were in Vegas together when we toured the facilities in Vegas. And what impressed me was the young lady who owned the first, I think, place we went out, the minority owner. Her husband was a former NFL player. And our conversation on the side was her entire security staff was a minority-owned security staff. That was very impressive. It was probably the best operation that I saw out of California, Colorado, and Vegas. I thought she ran the best operation. The organization of people who were working here were people of color. When we went to the grow house, I thought it was important that, they were training people of color and minorities and obviously women to not only get into the dispensary business, but to the grow business. And I think down the line, I think that's something here in New Jersey, and particularly the areas, the farming areas that we can, train through vocational training, the grow industry. So people are able to understand how, they could cultivate. And then obviously, like you said, the small things like city like Patterson, we have boxing, we have packaging, we have delivery services that are minority. And these are the businesses that need to get in on the business and have the opportunity to get on it. Because many of these businesses, even if it be the school district or the local hospital, it's kind of been the same people who've gotten the business over and over again, from security to transportation to the food industry, you name it. So those are the things that I think we have to take advantage of to, extend the, economic prosperity to our communities.
Your colleagues in the administration and this newly appointed CRC, or whenever it's seated, have discussed doing some public education, maybe training is part of this too, and getting out in the community for this organization, talking about the opportunities and benefits. You work with youth. Assemblywoman Dunn, you've mentioned your background in education youth. There might be an opportunity for training here too, using some of those dollars that'll be generated to let people know here's what you can do. I am going to ask Assemblywoman Zwicker our last question of the day, and we're fortunate to have your science background here. Talk to us today about where technology can be applied here to help. Particularly, I know you're working in the employer setting, but tech helps and innovation helps, and these are your comfort zones. Talk to us a little bit about what you think where technology can be helpful here.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So a couple of things have come out, and we talk about the fact that there's really no difference between smoking tobacco versus smoking cannabis, public imbibing of alcohol, public imbibing of cannabis. But technology is definitely a place where it's lagging right now. And this will be a real game changer, I think. So there's two places. First one is, like we already mentioned, how do we know if someone is under the influence, and needing to know that in real time, right? Right now, all you can do is a sort of behavioral and sort of how do people act? But we don't have an ability to do the equivalent of a breathalyzer. Now, there are companies that are working on this, and it's getting better. It's not quite there yet. It's not quite at the point where, a law enforcement person could give a quick and instant test and know whether someone's under the influence. So a lot of what we're talking about today is related to that. I think the other place where technology can be a real game changer is in everything we're talking about, which is ease of getting access to the industry. How can technology help put into place a variety of different quality control issues, for instance, right? We talk about, and we saw this in Colorado when it came to the edible market, and trying to get control on how much THC, the active ingredient, was in an edible, and packaging, and some of the things that someone in Wimberley is talking about right now. Technology is going to play a real role when it comes to safety for those who are imbibing, quality control, packaging, et cetera. These are all being developed, and I think there's enormous opportunity here for innovation in this entire space.
That's excellent. I am going to take the multitude of questions real quick to answer when the next round will open, what's going on. Here's what we know. Your legislature acted and the governor signed into law a piece of legislation essentially enacting the constitutional amendment that passed in November. The Cannabis Regulatory Commission now members have been named, at least the current members have been named. But it hasn't officially met yet, is my understanding. Once that organization meets, they will start promulgating their regulations, both from the Jake Honig Act that passed in 2019, that will allow for expansion on some of the medical opportunities, and then the new adult use statutory provisions, the regulations that will define them. When will the next round be? Well, there's a current round right now that was let in 2019. It's been subject to litigation. There are 24 new licenses. Currently, there are 12 vertically operated in a state. There will be 24 new licensees once that round is let, and that could be really any day now. Those exist. There are 4 more verticals in that round. There are 5 separate standalone grow opportunities for the first time in that round, and 15 standalone retail. So there is new opportunities that are already spoken for, unfortunately, coming in the pipeline. When new rounds are let, what the RFA, if that's how they're going to handle this, will be, what the numbers will be, we don't know yet. That's up to the Regulatory Commission. We'll see that soon. One thing I want to just offer to everybody, and this is a product of the folks here on this phone call, there's phenomenal work that was done in this legislation that created a opportunity for smaller, less capitalized people to get into this market. The micro program is really an amazing effort. What was done here to focus the ability to have people come in at a much smaller scale and be able to graduate up. That was one of the things that some of these legislators on this phone call worked on, is to take the ceiling off of this. It's an incredible opportunity. We don't know the specifics of it yet. Again, that's subject to regulation. So I just wanted to give folks that were on the phone call or on the Zoom call that are waiting for what's coming next. The short answer is we don't just know the timing, but there's going to be a lot of innovation coming out of this law and then out of this regulatory body. I want to thank each of you today. This is outstanding. I can't wait to see what comes from each of you. I think the work you're doing already is outstanding, and moving forward, we are changing culture, we are changing law, and we are changing people's lives, and hopefully bringing good revenue into the state too. Tom Bracken, thank you for this opportunity. And if you would like to close us out, I really appreciate you giving this forum the opportunity to use the Chamber's platform today.
Bill, thank you very much for moderating this panel. I want to thank all the panelists for taking time out of their very busy schedule to provide this extremely insightful discussion. I think it's very obvious that we are at the beginning of this journey in our state, but the journey can be very transformative for our state. And I think that's important to realize. I think the way we would get from the opportunity to the end product that is transformative is having thoughtful leaders guide this, thoughtful leaders like all of our panelists today to help guide this. And I think if the people involved in framing this legislation, final legislation to get us to the end game, are like the panelists today, will be in good hands, and the state of New Jersey will get the maximum benefit out of this new industry that's evolving. So thank you all very much for what you're doing, for your leadership, for what you will be doing. Thanks everybody for being on this webinar today, and please enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much.